All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us in person. Arlington County Police Department and the Commonwealth Attorney's Officer here with us this evening. We'll do a quick attendance and then get rolling. We've got some supplemental training tonight and a short break, and then we'll go through our normal administrative updates. Commissioner Montgomery. Here. Commissioner McCullough.
Present.
Commissioner Shotkin. Here. Commissioner Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Miller. Here. Commissioner Evans. Here. Commissioner Ortiz.
Here. Here.
We will go ahead and jump in. I think we have a slide deck for our training. Tonight, we're going to go over a couple of different things. For an upcoming case, we wanted to review grand jury protocols and procedures, as well as some related ACPD policies. One other element that we included that we wanted to revisit for some of our recurring discussion of just disciplinary sufficiency in our considerations was an overview on discipline kind of more abstractly and holistically, so we have a better sense of what we're working with. But once we got the slides up, we will go ahead and get started. Our first section here is going to be on grand jury proceedings, and we'll welcome Commonwealth Attorney Carissa to
Degani Taffy.
to kick us off.
All right. Hi, everybody, and thank you for inviting me as the subject matter expert for grand juries. I'm going to talk about one kind of grand jury today. We have different kinds of grand juries. We have regular grand juries, we have special grand juries, and we have multi-jurisdictional grand juries. The special and the multi-jurisdictional, I'm not going to talk about. Those are much more what we think of as the grand juries that we see on television, where the prosecutor is inside of the room and presenting evidence, and there's multiple witnesses. The regular grand jury is very different from that, and the function of it is still to make a determination of probable cause, whether or not there's evidence to prove that you should go forward with the indictment. But the process is given. So I'm gonna, and most of the cases that go to grand jury are going to be felonies. We will sometimes have ancillary misdemeanors. So I'm going to talk a little bit just through the process of how it even gets to a grand jury. And so it'll start with the complainant, really, which is the police officers going to the magistrate, who are considered judges, but they're not lawyers. So they're not always, it's a different kind of a judge that we normally think of. And they will say what the facts are, and the magistrate will make a decision about what warrants to issue. And we don't get the case until after a person is arraigned on those warrants. So if they're held, they'll be arraigned on the next business day. If they're not held, they will be given a date to come back to court in the afternoon. Or if they make bail, they will come back in the afternoon, about 3 weeks later. So once they've come in for their arraignment, they have counsel, whether it's appointed or hired. We will go through processes like bond, or we'll just get sort of started with the case. And on our end, we provide discovery, we interview the witnesses, that sort of thing. Then if it's a felony, it's going to come to what's called a preliminary hearing, about 4 to 6 weeks after that arraignment date. And sometimes by the time we get to a preliminary hearing, we have a sense of whether or not the defendant is going to plead guilty. We've already turned over all of the evidence, all of the discovery, and we will ask them, here's a plea deal. Do you waive preliminary hearing or not? And usually if there's already a deal, they'll waive preliminary hearing, and then we will go straight into the grand jury process. Now, grand jury happens, I think you can go to the next slide, sorry. So grand jury, the grand jury happens basically for a 2-month term. So it's one set of people for 2 months. So January and February will have the same set of people. March and April will have the same set of people. And it's in our here. And so we're required to at least one time every 2 months by law to convene a grand jury. We have enough cases that we convene 2 a month.
Did you
And
say every 2 months? Or once?
I'm
every
sorry,
6 months?
I'm sorry, once a month. Sorry. So it's once a month, but it's a term of 2 months. And so we only have 6 sets of grand jurors throughout the year.
How many people are on a grand jury?
So there, oh gosh, I did not think anyone would ask me that question. There's, I think, a minimum number of 7 that need to be, I can't remember if I'm thinking about, yeah, I think there's a minimum number of 7 and only 4 have to agree with, like, only 4 have to make the decision of whether or not is a true bill or no true bill. So it doesn't need to be unanimous.
And do they meet every day?
No, they meet one day a month.
1 day a month?
Right. So the last Friday or the last Monday of the month. But that's all sort of peculiar to Arlington. You could have it on a Wednesday if you wanted. You could have it every Wednesday if you wanted. I'm sure jurisdictions, that have a lot more crime do it a lot more frequently than we do.
So they really only have two meetings?
2 meetings, yeah. Again, this is the regular grand jury. And, oh gosh, Mommy, can you please make that bigger so I can see what I wrote?
It is small font. Even I'm having a hard time.
Everybody get your second glasses, just layer up.
Yeah, I think I even through.
Yeah, can you move it over and, yeah. I still can't read that.
Maybe X out that top.
So I'm zooming it
Yeah,
in,
there you
which is making the
Oh,
screen
there
a
you
little
go.
bit.
There you go.
Is
Okay.
that better?
Yeah.
I'll just have to move it
But
around as you
also
go
it's good to-
down.
This is why I brought my code book, so that I wouldn't have to read it. But, there's 2 functions of the grand jury. The second one involves turning themselves into a special grand jury, so it's actually not relevant. But it's to consider bills of indictment prepared by the attorney for the Commonwealth, that's me, and to determine whether as to each such bill, there is sufficient probable cause to return such indictment, quote, a true bill. And so we're the party that is deciding at that point what is going forward. And by that point, we determined, which witnesses are going to be cooperative, if the victim's going to be cooperative, if, we think there's a problem with the evidence, or if the defendant has already agreed to plead guilty to certain things. We're not going to bring every single charge that was initially brought to the grand jury to consider, because there are things going on in the background that, would make it irrelevant to bring every charge. And there's also sort of, in my opinion, and based on a report that I had, that an independent researcher completed in 2020, there's a lot of overcharging going on at that initial stage before we're ever involved. And so, we're using that opportunity to right size charges. We're using that opportunity to bring forth only what we need. And there's also, we have philosophical positions on charging decisions. And some of that is that we try not to charge things with a mandatory minimum. Those are the drivers of mass incarceration oftentimes. And so our policy is, if there's another charge that captures the behavior, then we should be charging that and not charging the mandatory minimum. And I ran on those principles both in 2019 and in 2023, and the community agreed with those principles. And then I explained to the grand jurors, you might not see all of the charges that you could possibly think of. And it's because of policy, it's because of evidentiary problems that we foresee. It's because of missing or uncooperative witnesses. It's because we might have already had a plea deal, but we can't tell them which cases there's already a plea deal in. Yes.
and I'm just trying to sort of get the background
Yeah.
here, but your position on charging mandatory or not charging, that's different from your predecessors?
That's correct.
Okay.
And, so, and I have a, the discretion, I wanted to include this discretion of the Commonwealth, because that's a seminal Virginia Supreme Court case that, and you could read it, the executive branch remains the absolute judge of whether a prosecution should be initiated in the first instance, and the first and presumptively the best judge of whether a pending prosecution should be terminated before trial. The exercise of its discretion with respect to the termination of pending prosecutions should not be judicially disturbed unless clearly contrary to manifest public interest. In this way, the essential function of each branch is synchronized to achieve a balance that serves both practical and constitutional values. Well, until we get the indictment, the judge is not in a position to make a determination about, we're not moving to dismiss anything, so they're not in a position to make a determination. So there's a very solid basis in law that the executive decides what charges to put in front of the grand jury, and that is the executive that is putting those charges in front of a grand jury. We do have secrecy in the grand jury, so whatever a witness says is secret. And I'll talk about sort of the roles and what people do and the roles that we have, but who is on the grand jury, what they're doing on the grand jury, the cases that are before them, the witnesses that come before them, all of that is confidential. And it's confidential according to case law, because grand jury proceedings are to remain secret, protecting individuals under investigation, and in order to protect individuals under investigation and to encourage public cooperation. And so, we tell the grand jurors, you can't talk about this. You can't go home and talk about what you did, because it's for your protection and for the protection of the accused. Because if somebody turns out to be, if you find a no true bill because you think that there's not probable cause, you can't then go out and wreck the reputation of the person who is the target of this investigation and prosecution. So, and there are times when a grand jury finds no true bill because somebody was sick and somebody else read for them and couldn't answer the questions, or we had one grand jury where where every single marijuana charge, even the possession with intent to distribute charges, the grand juror just was saying no to all of them and convinced everybody else, and so they just no true billed all of those cases. So they'll do some funny things occasionally, but it's members of the community, and they're sort of expressing the conscience of the community, just like I'm responsible for expressing the conscience of the values and consciences of the community, because they elected me to do that.
You can only bring a case to one grand jury?
No, we can bring it to multiple grand
So
juries.
in this case with the marijuana, could you bring it to another grand jury?
If we chose to, we could, yes. And I think in some of those we did. So, and you can go to the next slide. So the way that we get people to the grand jury is that we give them we call it it's really a notice. It's not technically a subpoena, but it's like a subpoena or a summons. And it is, the statute gives us the discretion of who we want to bring in front of the grand jurors to testify. Normally, we get sworn in as the legal counsel to grand jurors, and we're not even allowed as the Commonwealth to be in the room. For the regular grand jury, we're not in the room when testimony is happening. And I think that's to protect the integrity of the process, so that the person who's testifying doesn't feel compelled to say something. It's supposed to be objective. And then but what happens is that if the grand jury has legal questions, and I explain all of this to them as well, if they have legal questions, they call down to me in the office, and I go up, and answer their legal questions. And the kinds of legal questions I've had are like, what is brandishing? So I can't tell them, oh, in this case where the guy was waving it around, he was brandishing. what I can say is, like under the case law, it's like displaying, threatening with, that kind of thing. If they're asking me, well, this is a question that comes up and I always get in front of it. Like possession, like what is possession? When you're talking about drugs and guns, and it's like, well, knowledge, it doesn't mean it's on your person, it's knowledge, it's dominion, it's control, and like, can you get to it, that kind of thing. And so that they're not sort of mistakenly believing that it has to be in your pocket for you to possess it. So, we're allowed to say to them, this is the definition of possession, but we're not allowed to say, well, these facts, like we're not allowed to apply the facts of a case or apply the law to the facts of a particular case and answer the question for them. Our witnesses are, I don't remember a single time where we've had more than one witness or they were anybody but an officer. And so our witnesses will tend to be the arresting officer. Sometimes we make a mistake and, if the arresting officer was just the person at the end that nobody looked carefully enough to see, and, we ended up with the wrong person. That hasn't happened, but, it conceivably could. But it's always an officer, and it's usually one officer to cover what happened. If there's like two pieces of a case that are separate from each other, we had one case that was a domestic violence case and then an assault on a police officer, and they were separate. It was the same defendant, and like the same night as it happened, but they were separate things, and different people witnessed each piece of it, and were involved in each piece of it. So, there you would have to have two officers, but, or you could have one officer read another, even. But it tends to not be much more than reading the police report and then answering the grand jurors' questions, because they are allowed to ask questions of the officers.
Could an officer request to give testimony if they weren't subpoenaed?
They would have to ask us, and because it's our discretion, by code, it is our discretion who is allowed to speak to the grand jury.
I believe Charles has a question.
Yep.
Yeah, so you mentioned officer sometime reading in, and I think you were kind of telling us more about that. But if you were mentioning earlier, if an officer was sick, how that would be handled. So in what circumstances, and how do you select folks who aren't the arresting officer to present on behalf of that arresting officer if that arresting officer is not otherwise available?
That's a great question. So what normally happens in that case is that an officer will reach out to us and say, we're sick, we have mandatory training, for whatever reason we can't be there. Can I have somebody read for me? And it's usually not an issue. I don't prefer it, because in my experience, the most frequent times where we get no true bill is when an officer is reading for another officer and they can't answer the question. The grand jurors' questions, and so there's like a missing piece there, but it's preferable to at least have somebody there than to hold it for another grand jury cycle.
And in that sense, you literally mean reading, as in literally
Yeah,
reading.
literally reading the report. Yeah,
And
Because
then,
they can't attest to facts that they weren't there for.
correct.
and then can the grand jury ask the officer questions?
Yes.
Okay.
But the witnesses are there to provide facts, and any law, sort of legal advice and like the indictments and that sort of thing are presented by the Commonwealth. So like we have very distinct roles. An officer can't ask for an indictment, in other words, or advise the grand jurors about the law. And we provide grand jurors with, I don't I try not to bombard them with information, but I do provide code books for them. And then if there's a question, I will always bring up jury instructions, because the jury instructions are great about laying out the elements. And so I'll bring up jury instructions and show them the jury instructions so that they can see sort of like, the elements are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then they can then apply that information to that framework to the information that they've received.
Sorry, I totally don't mean to keep asking.
No,
questions, but, I don't even know who this is for, but do the officers get training in how they're supposed to behave in front of a grand jury? Like, is that something that you cover?
It's probably covered during the field training process as they kind of like, what like an FTO will observe them testifying in traffic court, for instance, and that's kind of the easiest way to sort of get your feet wet, or a probable cause hearing in front of the magistrate's office. And so they're given that direction through field training, but there are, and I remember this distinctly, there are like mock trials that occur at the academy where you know, there's a judge sitting in the front in a black robe and you kind of have to testify on behalf of some make-believe case. So you do get guidance and training and practice before you actually become a police officer on, you know, how to testify. You get that feedback at the academy. Your field training is sort of monitoring what you're doing, et cetera. Is there anything else that I'm missing?
No, it's mainly focused, the training is mainly focused, has been on courtroom testimony. The grand jury is a little different because it's not ask a question, answer a question, ask a question, answer a question, it's just talk.
Yeah.
So, I remember the first couple of times I went to it, I felt a little lost. And, this is something we're adding into our, between the academy and field training to make sure, because it's different. And if an officer goes through field training and, you have to take a felony arrest to end up in the grand jury. So, it depends on the timing of when they make their first felony arrest, of whether that'll happen while they still have an FTO or if they're on the road, which I would prefer they have an FTO the first time.
But I remember my first time too, and it's, finding a detective on the 8th floor or a senior officer on the squad and being like, hey man, I'm about to go to Grand. What is this all about? Tell me what to do. And, it's sort of explaining that process. And it's kind of like what, Ms. Tappy said, which is like, it depends on what you're doing. A lot of times it's just reading the case. It's a lot of times, even if it's your case, that way you don't get lost. It's kind of reading the case and making sure that you're hitting all the necessary facts. Because if you've done a good job writing your case report, all the facts and the elements of the crime are going to be there. You know what I mean? So.
And there are cases where there's stuff that wasn't in the reports, but should be in supplements, or, if the detective has been working on the case, they're already going to know that. It's not a hard process. And we've done trainings with ACPD and with Falls Church, where we've done mock trials and that sort of thing as well. And grand jury's never been an issue. It's not that complicated.
Are the proceedings, you're not in the room, no one from your office is in the room.
Nobody.
No one other than the officer
Correct.
and the grand jury members are in the room.
Correct.
Tonight.
Correct.
Are they otherwise like recorded or transcribed or anything like that?
Not for the regular grand jury, no. A multi-jurisdictional and a special grand jury, which are more investigative in nature, will be, but the regular grand jury is not. And then the officer or witness, I say officer because all of the witnesses are officers, they will leave for the grand jury's deliberations, because the deliberations are done completely in secrecy. So, and they're not supposed to tell us about their deliberations.
So for the most part, you don't really, nobody really knows what goes on in there, whether things go well or they don't go well, or what happens, unless it comes to your attention.
Correct. Correct. And if you want me to talk about this particular situation that, is on all of our minds and how it came to my attention, I'm happy to talk about that. But no, unless the grand jurors say something, or my paralegal who's, sort of administrating everything says something, I wouldn't know what, and I shouldn't know what happens.
Well,
So,
for purposes of today's conversation, we want to just like make sure that everybody has a very general, non-case specific context as to like how things happen. But I just asked that question for people to know, like, whether, or like, what is the norm of what happens there? And also that there, because of this unique secrecy of it, there isn't, it may be difficult sometimes to create like protocols or trainings or different things like that, where you don't necessarily know like how things are going unless you're given specific feedback about an instance.
Right. And each grand jury has their own personality. You know, I've had grand juries that have asked me quite literally 25 questions throughout the day. And then I've had grand juries that zip through in, you know, in just a few hours and don't ask any questions at all. Some of it sometimes is the complexity of cases, but usually it's just the personality of that particular grand jury.
For the deliberations, when they report back to you, whether or not they found probable cause for it to be a true bill, if they don't find it to be a true bill, do they have to give you a reason?
No. So it's the indictment is literally a piece of paper for every single charge, not multiple charges in a case, although we have started doing that. But anyway, for every single charge, they're making a determination of whether it's a true bill or not, marking the page, true bill or not true bill. And that's all the information we ever have. We don't know why. Sometimes I can deduce why based on their questions. And you know, sometimes they like get to bickering and I'm like, stop, you can't do this in front of me. But I don't know why from their mouths.
I have a question about the indictment. It lists the witnesses, and are those witnesses to the whole case or just the witnesses that you as Commonwealth Attorney want to be appearing in front of the grand jury?
The latter.
Okay.
So it's the people that we've noticed to come.
Okay.
And, you know, again, if somebody is sick or, you know, can't come or whatever, we'll scratch it out and write the other person's name, but it goes through us.
And it's
to make
typically
the
just
determination.
one person for that case?
Yeah,
Typically.
it's usually one person. I mean, I can't think of, except for one time, that one case that I was telling you about. I can't think of any time where we've needed more than one person. Oh, sorry. All right, I'm talking. I'm sorry.
It became such a conversation.
Question, but I'm good. Thank you.
So, you know, I wanted to just leave you all with these two things because I think that they're important. If somebody is in there trying to persuade or interfere with a juror, that would be obstruction of justice. If anybody but our office, and specifically me, because I do our grand juries, you know, or whoever I authorized to do the grand jury is giving legal advice or trying to present indictments or anything like that, that would be the unauthorized practice of law.
Okay.
And I spelled attorney wrong. So, Bummy, you're gonna need to fix that.
Is there a particular standard or kind of like factors that you take into consideration to determine whether or not grand juries can bring it in place? Like, what's the kind of thresholds?
Well, we've never had a situation like this except for the one time.
Generally speaking, is there a standard by which you kind of like evaluate whether you think that there's, you know, any sort of issues with whether or not they're able to objectively, you know, perform their duties?
So I would look at, if I knew what was said, I would look at what was said. I would look to the jurors to see how they felt about it. You know, I would, I mean, that's pretty much what I would do, is to see, like, did they seem to be influenced?
Because the testimony is secret, and I think we spoke about this a little bit in our prep, that like, they're there to testify to the facts of the case. They bring a report and they typically read from it just because that's the only way to kind of keep track of all of those things in order. But the grand jury is not really limited at all in what they can ask a witness. So if they ask a witness for their opinion.
Well, it's up to the witness to know better than to offer their opinion.
I had another question, but I forgot.
I have one.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what happens once you've determined that a grand jury has been tampered with? Like, what's the impact of that? What do you have to do at that point?
So I would have to notify the defense counsel in all of the cases that were in front of that grand jury. And then I would have to notify them and ask them if they wanted us to bring the case to another grand jury. If it was in the middle of there, because the same people come back a second time, if it happened during their first month, I would have to disband the grand jury and bring another set of people and have the clerk of court bring another set of people in. If it happened their second month, I could take it to the next grand jury, which is going to be a whole different set of people. But I would have to make sure that it was clean. And in terms of, it might affect speedy trial. Technically speaking, the clock starts to run on speedy trial at a preliminary hearing, or at if the preliminary hearing was waived, it starts to run at the time of the grand jury finding a true bill. We would be in uncharted territory if I ended up losing a month of speedy trial. And just to give you a sense of what that would be, if we have on felonies for people who are held, we have only 5 months to try them. So we would end up losing a month potentially. And then if it was, if they're released, we have 9 months to try them. Now the defense can ask for an extension and have the time charged to them, but we statutorily, if the defense wants a trial in 5 months and they're held, we have to do a trial in 5 months.
By held, you mean in custody?
In custody, yes.
Just for people who may not be familiar with this. So they're incarcerated. I don't know how much of this is like legal jargon, because obviously I practice criminal.
Yeah, anybody stop me if you have any questions.
I was, on average, do you have a sense of how many cases a grand jury would hear? So like if you determined at the end of the day or like at some point during the day that something happened, about how many cases would you estimate might be impacted?
So we count by indictment, not by case. So there could be one case with 20 indictments. And we've had as few as 24 indictments after like the holidays tend to, the cycle ends up short and we end up with a lot of days off. And so there aren't that many cases going through the courts. So we've had as little as 25 and as many as like 130.
And can I ask, you don't have, because the regular grand jury is never transcribed, there's no, what cause, if any, do you ever have to ask an officer what he or she said in the grand jury?
We don't.
You don't, because it's just secret.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's so different than the federal system, because the federal system, it's transcribed, it's part of what's turned over if they testify at trial. And there's, of course, an attorney in there. So, I mean, there's pluses and minuses. I mean, I understand that not having a government attorney means that the grand jury is freer. At the same time, you literally don't know what's going on in there.
Exactly.
I'm not. So it's much more freewheeling.
Yeah. The special grand jury and the multi-jurisdictional grand jury are much more like the federal grand juries, but this is a totally different type.
And it's improper to ask an officer what they said.
So if we have a no true bill, we'll ask the officer like, hey, like, why do you think this happened? We're not saying, what did you say? What did they ask you? We're asking like, why do you think this happened?
Yeah.
Do you have any insight? Like, is there something we need to shore up and bring it back, or, that kind of thing. So I'll never ask directly what was said. I will just ask what their opinion is about why there was no true bill.
Yeah.
I don't remember if you said something about this when you were helping Dave and I get our heads around this. He was advantaged by his previous career, but I was advantaged by having access to Dave. But if there's a defendant where a grand jury finds no true bill, can you, maybe we covered this with the marijuana, but like, then you can decide
To bring it back.
to bring it back. Is there like a limit on how many times you can bring, without, outside the time
I think
constraints?
it's only one time
Okay.
that you can bring it back, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, it seems atypical.
Yeah.
But just like, if you felt like, you know, they must have misunderstood something
Right.
because this is
And
very
definitely
serious.
there's been times like that.
Okay.
So yeah, we would sort of take a hard look at ourselves and say, is this a factual issue or is this like something that didn't come out? You know, are we gonna have a problem at trial? You know, because we can't even get to probable cause. And if there's a problem with the case, we're not gonna bring it back. But if it's some weird thing that happened because somebody, you know, didn't have a document that they needed, or the wrong person, you know, was reading, or the grand jury was just like had to be in their bonnet about something, or didn't understand, like clearly, like I could tell from the questions they were asking that they were not understanding. And like, no matter what way I answered them, they were still not understanding. But I couldn't say, like, trust me, this is it. You know, we would bring that back, but we would always look to see, like, you know, why, and is this a problematic case that we need to reconsider?
Okay. So just to recap, so an officer arrests a person with some charges that the magistrate then arraigns them on.
Right.
You then, in some cases, offer a plea deal, in some cases, not appropriate. Then the grand jury is held, they find a true bill, it goes to trial.
Well, it goes into the posture of trial. We could still end up with a plea agreement later.
Right.
But yes, it's proceeding to circuit court. But even if somebody wants a plea deal and they waive indictment, we will still indict that case, and then it'll get set for a plea date instead of a trial date.
Okay. And so from the arraignment to the grand jury is not typically more than a month. because
Oh, no. It can be, I mean, if there are continuances, it could be, you know, it could be a matter of a month, or it could be a matter of several months.
Oh, I mean, sorry, between the arraignment and the grand jury.
It could be several months.
Oh.
Because if, you know, if we don't have a lab back and we need to continue the preliminary hearing, you know, if, you know, they fire their attorney, if the defendant fires their attorney, and, you know, there's a lot of reasons why delay can happen. Some of it, you know, which is like, you know, people get sick and people, you know, don't catch up with something, or, you know, or, you know, we're waiting on something to come in. You know, there'll be continuances. We don't love continuances, but, you know, it happens a lot.
And then my last question was, does the defense attorney then provide tests? There's no
No,
involvement. of the
defense attorneys are
just-
not allowed in.
That's in the trial. So this is just to determine probable cause based on what information there is that
Right.
it did take place.
I have one other question. So in a typical case, an officer arrests somebody on the street, they identify the charges, they go to the magistrate arraigns the person, and then this process begins. If they.
The magistrate issues the warrant. They don't arraign the person. The
Okay.
general district court or
They're arraigned in
juvenile.
district court.
Yeah.
Okay. So if they want to get an arrest warrant before the person is arrested, do they need to, do you participate in that process?
Sometimes. So if it's like a rape investigation or a homicide, or a complex financial crime, we'll be involved in that. If it's sort of like regular street crime, not necessarily.
And if you are involved, is that when the special grand jury is involved?
No. So we will at times work with detectives, and the detectives will ask us like, hey, you know, we want to get this warrant. And, you know, sometimes we feel a little more strongly than others about the charges, but ultimately they can get what they want, but we tend to collaborate on what's going when we're involved in the
And when they
investigation.
get the arrest warrant, is that before a magistrate or a district court? That's a
No, the magistrate
Okay.
will issue it and then it will be served on the individual.
Jump in just to kind of put this a little bit more in context on the testimony of an officer's. When the testimony of an officer's credibility becomes in question, what are the implications for that testimony and then future implications for
So,
testimony going forward in
yeah.
grand jury?
So we have constitutional and ethical obligations as prosecutors to, first, we have to disclose anything that might be exculpatory, potentially exculpatory or impeaching. That is constitutional law, like straight from the Supreme Court of the United States. Ethically, the Virginia Rules of Professional Responsibility require us to turn over anything that's potentially exculpatory or impeaching, like immediately. So as soon as we learn about it, we need to, ethically turn it over. And, we try to adhere to those because we want accurate and fair resolutions of cases. And in fact, we give over discovery before we make plea offers so that the defendants and their counsel are not in the dark about, what information might be there. And can do their own investigation. So if we find somebody who not credible, and that's within our discretion to make that determination. If we find somebody is not credible, we will not proffer their testimony because when we put somebody on the stand, we're putting our bar licenses, and you know this, David. We're saying that this person is trustworthy and you should believe them, and we're proffering their testimony. So if I don't feel comfortable standing behind somebody's testimony, I won't do it. Because at the end of the day, I have my constitutional obligations, I have my ethical obligations, and I have my bar license to worry about. And so I'm only going to put people on the stand that I believe will be telling the truth from, an unbiased perspective. And, we do have a statute, 19.2201C, and our law enforcement agencies are required to give us any information that would implicate the constitutional rights of a defendant or the credibility of officers. And part of that is to make sure that people are not, that agencies are not willing or sort of don't have patterns of exonerating officers, but it's also so that we can, when somebody is being investigated or when there is a finding, we're under an obligation to disclose that. And sometimes there's a finding and there's some violation is sustained. And it doesn't really affect things. We'll turn it over to defense counsel and say, here you go, we're disclosing this, in an abundance of caution, but we don't think it's relevant. And if you want to use it, we're going to file a motion and eliminate to prevent you from using it and let the judge decide. Because we don't want to have like a whole circus about like something that's not really related. But if it is relevant, then we'll weigh, like, is this something that, we still feel comfortable putting the person up anyway, or is it sufficiently problematic that we don't feel comfortable proffering their testimony?
You said
Regardless whether or not the crime was committed and the arrest happened.
Yeah, we have to make an independent credibility determination.
Thank you.
You said 19.201C, that's of,
Sorry,
you
it's
said 19.201C.
It's 19.2201C. That is,
But like,
yeah, it's a code that, a subsection of it requires, I can read it to you. Every chief law enforcement officer shall provide to the attorney for the Commonwealth access to all records, including police reports, disciplinary records, and internal affairs investigations related to wrongful arrest or the use of force complaints or other complaints that a person has been deprived of the rights, privileges, and immunities secured or protected by the laws of the United States and the Commonwealth made against a law enforcement officer who's employed by the chief law enforcement officer's agencies.
Okay, thank you. Anika, anything? Folks online, Charles or Lisa, questions? Okay, that was very helpful.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your participation. We have a break scheduled between trainings. If anyone wants to take a break, do we feel like taking 5 minutes? Yeah,
Take 5.
okay, we'll take 5.
Take 5.
We'll be back 5 minutes. Thanks, y'all.
Push-ups. Push-ups. Jump a chance. Take out.
Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Part two, we are going to go over some ACPD policies, both kind of related to the grand jury, but also the case that we're prepping for, and then disciplinary overview. So I will turn it over to Kim. Thank you for preparing to go over this. I'll advance the slides after you.
Great, thank you so much. So there's 3 different categories, as you mentioned, that we're going to be going over. And, you know, obviously the chief will certainly have an opportunity to chime in. But the first thing we're going to be talking about is the supervisor responsibilities at ACPD. And what you all probably didn't get in your baseline training was the way that we select supervisors. And I'm going to start with that because it kind of gives you a sense of what your responsibilities are going to be, right? So if we're testing future supervisors on these criteria, it means that you are going to be expected to perform these things at a certain level when you actually do become a supervisor. So I'll start foundationally with the way that we select supervisors. So we go through the county's assessment process, right? The county's HR department runs all of the assessments for county employees, and we use them to sort of facilitate and ensure the integrity of the processes that we use. And what you have before you on this first category is the things that we're going to, some of the things that we're going to measure these candidates during this selection process, or I guess it would be the assessment process for supervisory, eventual supervisory selection. So let's go through these real quick, and some of them are really self-explanatory. Written and verbal communication, obviously you're going to have to be able to do that at a certain level. Interpersonal and leadership skills, reasoning, problem analysis skills, resource management, planning, coordinating, scheduling, and delegating work activities, performance management, and then tactical and technical proficiency. So I'm going to just talk about the last 2 things because they might not necessarily be self-explanatory. Like the other things, I think you can kind of guess what they're testing. And the processes that we use are multi-day processes. And if you can imagine, you know, providing written samples, interacting with like a role player to make sure that you have those interpersonal skills. And then a group of assessors comes in from a different jurisdiction. We always are very, we're thankful that we have so many people willing to help us, and we certainly do the same for them when they need that help. But let's just talk about performance management. That's sort of this role playing where you are acting as though you are a supervisor, and you are coaching, mentoring, disciplining, or it may be something like involving like a community meeting, but you're providing that sort of those skills and you're demonstrating this. I guess a community meeting wouldn't fit in there, but like say for instance, if you have a subordinate exercise and something, your employee has done something wrong, that you're going to be asked to sort of counsel that employee in the best way possible. So that's going to test your knowledge of the way that we do things, your knowledge of ACPD policies, procedures, laws, etc. And you're going to have to develop some sort of counseling template to bring this employee to where they need to be. And I'm explaining all these things to you because it's important that you understand that that's probably a big function, which we're going to get to on the next slide, of what we expect our supervisors to do on a daily basis. Technical proficiency, what does that mean? Well, that is going to a scene and doing the thing above, which is resource management, planning, coordinating, scheduling, delegating officers to do certain tasks during like an active scenario, right? So you show up on a scene, it's kinetic. Are you able to ensure that the roads are blocked off, that you have officers that are staged appropriately, that can handle this and work with the situation? Are you making sure that there's officers available to collect the evidence afterwards? And are you managing that in a way where you've done it in the most efficient way possible? And so that skill that we're going to test in this process is something that, again, these supervisors are going to be expected to do every single day.
Captain Kim, who is selected to go into this assessment process? Like, how do you funnel it?
Great question. So there's a mandatory minimum that you need to meet before let's say you want to go to the first level, which is a sergeant. And I believe right now it's 5 years of law enforcement experience, and you sort of meet that mandatory minimum. And then you go through the assessment center. It's done again with county HR and then our partners around the jurisdictions. People of similar or higher rank are going to be the ones that are making this assessment on this individual who is actually referred to by candidate number and not actually their name. So they're all assigned a number. It's all done in like anonymity. So, you don't know who you're talking
No
about, et cetera. Yeah, no favoritism, et cetera.
And
And
if
then
you meet the minimum, the employee signs themselves up.
Okay,
They
it's
ask to
voluntary.
participate.
Okay.
Yep, it's voluntary.
yeah.
How many people go through this like per cycle? And does everyone who meets the minimum want to sign up? Or-
No.
Okay.
No, so I mean, those are great questions. It's every 2 years we do this assessment center. And the reason that we do it every 2 years, because when this happens, it is a huge undertaking, both for county HR, for our law enforcement partners who assist us with the assessments, and then our internal staff that creates and designs these assessment centers. And then the actual assessment centers, which is a 2-day process. I mean, it's a massive pool, right? Involving a lot of people. It's done once every 2 years. You become eligible. And then, the county has specific rules about who's eligible for promotion. And then eventually, the chief gets to decide who gets to be promoted.
And we have a,
Go ahead. Phil.
we have a promotion cycle this year, right?
Mhm.
I'm trying to turn it back.
So we do off-cycle. So what we won't do, and thank God, is we won't do a sergeant, lieutenant, and captain assessment in the same year, right? Because
Okay.
if you can imagine if we did that, I mean, that would just be terrible for everyone involved. We off-cycle those, and I think this year it's captain and lieutenant. I think it's captain and lieutenant. Captain is going to happen very soon in the fall.
Yep, sergeants know.
Yeah, and then the lieutenant will happen the captain will happen in the spring very soon, and the lieutenant will happen in the fall, and then the sergeant will happen in the spring next year. So it's off cycle. They do this
It
intentionally.
does happen every year. It's just staggered.
It's staggered. It's staggered because you have to understand the fire department uses the county HR's department, the sheriff's department. There's a lot of people that work with county HR to create these assessments.
So to answer your question, and this is about how many, for sergeant, you might see 25-ish people.
For how many openings-ish?
Yeah, it depends on the year. It depends on how many people leave. I mean, it could be 8, 10 openings.
And the staff right now is,
It could be none. I mean, I know the higher up you go, when I was, much younger, it wasn't unusual for the captain list to, people take the captain's test and nobody gets promoted. Because there's fewer captains, and it's like a triangle.
right?
So, and lieutenant would be less, maybe 18, 17 people would take it. We don't ever really know who's going to take it until we put it out, offer the test. So it gives you an idea of numbers, but
And if you don't pass, you can take it the next cycle?
you can take it as many times as you like, and it's not pass, fail, it's ranked. So all those categories, you're given a score. So and it's the different grading variables are put together, and there's a score produced at the end, and how do you rank with everybody else who took it? That's part one. Part two is, I'm able to consider the top 5 people or 20%, whichever is greater. So, if you have 20 people take it, it's going to be 5. So 5 people would be eligible. And if at that point, we reach out to the people who will be considered when we're going to make a promotion, we ask them to submit a resume of sorts that outlines all their experience, their extras, all the awards, all the trainings, and a cover letter that gives them an opportunity to, say whatever they want to say directly to me. And then there's a feedback conversation because, I can't say that I can speak super intelligently about everybody in the police department. So I'm intentional about getting feedback from the deputy chiefs who talk to the captains who are closer to people maybe applying for sergeant than I am on a daily basis. So, and that's part of the conversation. So the deputy chiefs get feedback from their captains, and then I meet with the deputy chiefs and we go over all of this together. It's a very, we spend hours on promotions because I think it's such a big deal. And we need to talk about each candidate, go through the resumes, the cover letters, the feedback, and their career to make sure that we're doing the best we can. That's the second part of that. Yeah.
Is that a process that you go through, assuming for each rank that someone applies to in terms
Yeah.
of promotion?
Which part? Yeah, it's the same. I mean, yes, deputy chief is different. That's an appointment, not a promotion, but the sergeant, lieutenant, and captain is, that's that process that we just talked about.
And it's intense. I mean, the chief and I can both speak to this, having done this multiple times. It is an intense process, but the process is designed to test those things that we know historically supervisors are going to have to perform on a daily basis. And they're all weighted. They're weighted differently, but you can imagine a supervisor doing all of those things. And those are the big group categories. So when we talk about responsibilities, it really does fall into one of these things. And so let's say, the chief brings you into his office, shakes your hand and says, congratulations, you're getting promoted. Well, what happens next? And so that's this part two, and I'll let the chief talk about sort of the future of this. This is just kind of like the sort of what it is right now, but we do have plans to expand on this. Certainly there is an internal new supervisor training that we do hold every year. OPR is an integral part of that. That's because a lot of the things that you will end up having to do as a supervisor is that performance management. I call it performance management, but it's the administrative, I guess, concerns or issues that occur during the course of one's duties, right? Maybe they banged a car into a pole. How do we deal with that? What are the nuts and bolts of documenting this car collision that occurred on the P2 parking garage with a pole? They need to understand that, because when you are a P2 or a corporal, you have no idea. Because you were probably at some point in your career banged a pole and you had the talk from your sergeant and he or she gave you a little contact card or something for you to sign, but you have no idea what went into that and how this card ended up getting produced. And we're going to talk about that later on, about discipline, but we have to explain that process. It's sort of like, this is the process of how we document things, and that we're making sure that you understand our process. There's this other cohorts and things that we do to sort of build them to be coaches, mentors, and leaders right now. And we are expanding those programs. So there's a public safety leads cohort right now that involves all the public safety agencies, ACPD, DIPSM, the Sheriff's Department, the Fire Department are all participating in this cohort to become future leaders in public safety. There's the Arlington County cohorts, which I've participated in several of them, and I believe the chief has too, that are for mid-level managers, aspiring supervisors, and I think there might be another one. But those cohorts too, again, developing those conflict resolution skills, the basic things that regardless of where you work, either as a DES supervisor or as a public safety supervisor, you're going to have to learn conflict resolution in a way that is consistent with the rules and regulations, both within the county and within our agency. And again, those skills and those sort of, that knowledge has to be passed down. So cohorts are a good way to make a network connection, because there's other people within the county umbrella employees that are sort of at a similar level, sort of sharing experiences and then developing those skills at the same time. ICS 300 and 400, what is that? FEMA mandates that we do incident command, ICS stands for, what's that?
System.
Sorry, it's late. Incident command system training. What is that? That is taking the supervisor standing in the back of a police cruiser managing a major traffic collision with, hey, you go monitor traffic, you go collect evidence, you go to the hospital under the FEMA system, because FEMA has a system on how we need to manage incidents, and that has to be taught to supervisors. Because if you can do I can manage a major crash with managing and branching out and delegating authority, well, then you can handle a larger incident, and then you can handle a larger incident, and then you get to the point where you're handling some of the largest incidents within the county. And we have several of them, 9/11, right? That started out with scribbling some stuff down on a napkin and then expanded out to a full ICS, roadmap. So if you can handle those things, then you're going to do a good job. That's about teaching people incident management. OPR quarterly training for supervisors. Those are sort of what's the new concern of the day. And I'm the one who teaches those every quarter to all the supervisors within the agency. It's like, here are the things that I'm noticing that we're not necessarily doing a very good job with. And that usually is something administratively. Hey, you guys are forgetting to do like these small tasks within our Blue Team and iPro modules that I need you to do, or there's some new policy or procedure that everyone needs to be read in on. It's like, from this day forward, we're going to start doing it this way. Right now, for the last year or so, I've been getting everyone to what I call level set 0, which is I need everyone to operate this way foundationally, and then I will build you up this way. And that's been a process, but I have seen this been very effective in the last 6 months about the consistency of the way that we are doing things. So this is actually working, and I'm very happy with the way that it's going. All supervisors meetings, those happen probably biannually, sometimes more frequently, depending on what's going on. There we're delivering, again, little doses of training. One year we did training on jurisdictional boundaries. You'd be amazed about how many little areas there are in Arlington where we don't have concurrent jurisdiction and we have no legal authority to do anything on. And so it's those types of things that need to be broadcast out to say, hey, like, this is a specific area where there is no concurrent jurisdiction, so you need to understand that, when you enter this piece of property. So, and then we have this sort of Sergeant FTO training program, which is when you are a new supervisor. Again, you just came out of the chief's office, you shook his hand, you're super excited. You got sent to midnights because you're the young guy or a lady that is going to now go to midnights. And then how are you shepherded through all the things that I just managed to make sure that we're doing a good job? And your first sergeant on your squad is going to walk you through that process. That's generally the most senior sergeant on your squad who kind of knows everything. And then if I missed anything, Chief, please.
No, I mean, the Sergeant FTO it's not new, but it hasn't been around forever. I know when I got promoted to sergeant, it didn't exist. And, I think we've come a long way in making sure that we're preparing new supervisors. I mean, I've been the acting or the chief since September of 20. And in that little bit of time, I've promoted 85% of our supervisors. That's a lot for a 4.5 year period. So I think, we're being much more diligent in making sure that we're equipping all of our supervisors to be successful. And I think I mentioned it to you before, our human resources management section used to be HR and training. Well, we split training off. It's its own section, now has its own commander. And the focus here really is a few different things. We don't have our own academy, so we send our people to a regional academy, which is it's a little generic. It's not Arlington focused. So one of the questions is, how do we, at the same time they're going to a regional academy, really drill Arlington into them, how we do business here? And we have a lot of different ways that we're staying engaged with them. We're making Arlington the focus of their initial training, but we're really front loading a lot of training before they even go to the academy. It used to be we wouldn't hire people until a couple of weeks before the academy because they would wait. Well, now we hire people as soon as we get through the background and they're ready to be hired. So we're really trying to focus on bringing those skills up as quickly as we can, because over the last 4 years, we've lost a lot of people. So there's, when I was a new officer, there was a bunch of veteran officers around me all the time to tell me, no, don't do that, do this. And, we have a lot more newer officers. Like last year, we hired 47 people. That's a good year. to hire that many, but it's just, there's a lot of new. A lot of new comes with a lot of energy, but it also needs to come with a lot of focus to make sure we're giving them all the skills and information that can be successful. So we're focusing on new people, but part of this training unit is really focusing. We have PS leads that Albert mentioned, but it's really going beyond that. And how do we create a public safety leadership platform across all of public safety for the general leadership, but really how do we continue to build people throughout their career? So we picked a model of leader of self, so that's non-supervisors, because everybody's a leader at some level, leader of others, sergeants and lieutenants probably, and leader of leaders. And we're going to build this program to constantly provide leadership training, coaching training, tactical scenarios to make sure that we are pushing the skills that everybody needs to be successful. And this unit's only been in existence, I don't know, 6 months maybe, and they're really starting to build outlines now. So I'm real excited about where that's going. That's it.
Chief, when you say the unit, you mean the training with the new
Training.
commander?
That was
Okay.
split off from
Yep.
HR
Yes.
6 months ago.
It was about 6 months ago.
Yeah. Yeah. So lots of good, positive things to come. And like the chief said, I mean, we're really drilling down on, one of the things that we talked about is what happens when you get cut loose from field training? What additional training are you getting, right? Just because you pass field training doesn't mean that you're ready or necessarily equipped to handle all the things that you may not have been exposed to during your 12 weeks of field training. So what are we doing with those individuals? How are we ensuring that they be successful? If we build a very strong foundation, that's when, if you have a very solid and strong foundation, then there's no limit to what you can achieve. It's just making sure that that foundation is well built, stable. And that's sort of like a segue into multiple different things, but it does harp on supervisors and supervisor training, because that is a critical piece of this agency. Making sure that our sergeants are equipped, lieutenants, captains, everyone is equipped. Our leaders are equipped to lead their personnel effectively. So, all right, next slide.
Question about the
Yeah.
supervisory selection process.
Yeah.
To what extent do you all take into consideration an officer's history with any sort of like complaints or sustained allegations or anything of that nature? What sort of things would you say are like things that you would find to be concerning in that selection process? And then I think just to give maybe a juxtaposition and give like some, paint a picture of what some of these things mean. Like maybe we can also talk about like what sort of characteristics and skill sets you think make someone a sound candidate or to serve as a supervisor.
So I can tell you, because I want to answer this cautiously, and the chief certainly, he's the one who makes the decision. There's a collective bargaining agreement that we have that enumerates specifically what is going to be considered a disqualifier. Okay, so I just want to make sure that everyone understands that is within the collective bargaining agreement. And of course, the way that the assessment process, the way it works is you do have that 5 or 20% that the chief's his discretion, to select someone from that group. So there is some discretion and some latitude there. And I'm sure they look at a whole host of things, but I don't want to speak for you, Chief, because I'm not the guy who makes those promotions.
So the one other thing that I didn't mention that comes in is the 2-year disciplinary history for every person is something that Albert and his team provide as part of all the information that we have. And, the skills to be a leader, I think the skills to be a leader are the skills to be a leader from almost anywhere. Can you articulate what you're doing? Can you communicate with people? Can you will you make a decision? Are your analytical skills sound? Can you see the bigger picture and not narrowly focus on something? I think I can keep rattling the list, but it's, has the person demonstrated proficiency in basic police work? Do they have skills and abilities beyond basic police work? Have they been a detective, been in community engagement, done different things? Because, when I talk to the new people, one of the things I say all the time is, broadening your police career is important because it gives you different lenses to see things through. Detectives look at things different than a midnight officer in a lot of different ways. But I think it's equally important as human beings that it's not just police work, have other interests, sports, church, whatever, because that also provides you more different lenses to see the world through. And I think that's a big deal because, we ask an awful lot of officers, and it's particularly challenging for new officers because we do have a lot that we ask of them. So the more we can look big versus narrow, the better we do normally. And understanding the values of the agency is we have never taken a posture we're going to police this community, so we're going to police with this community. I mean, I firmly believe that we're at our best when we're working with the community, and I believe that. And I'm never going to say that we get it right 100% of the time, but are we trying to get it right? And is the person demonstrating to understand that and to look at the big picture and what's the best thing to do? And rarely is there a crystal clear, well, this, then this. That's just not the police work.
Yeah.
So how do I take my 5 different options that are legal and within policy and pick the best one? Well, I might not always, but as long as I can check those 2 boxes, we'll be okay, but we're going to be better if we pick the best one all the time. So, and that comes from the ability to see big. And, and it's really about connecting with people. A good leader connects with people.
Thank you.
I ramble a
That's
lot, but I
helpful.
hit a lot of things.
No, that's really helpful. I just wanted to make sure that we were like painting a picture of like what these things mean in practice, not just for people in this room, but for the public.
I think you're going to see a little bit of that on the next slide, because but I think what I wanted to do was sort of set this up. Like, if you understand what we test for, you're going to understand what you're going to eventually, what we expect you to do on a daily basis, right? So like that sort of segues into this. What are your responsibilities? Well, we're certainly not going to test you in basket weaving if we're not going to expect you, like basket weaving was up there, then, you'd be like, well, I guess they basket. So, but if that kind of makes sense. So broadly, this is sort of what your responsibilities are, supervisor. And don't forget about the things that we talked about before. And we've already touched on a lot of these. And the chief has, and he'll speak to the key initiatives of the agency, right? We have the key initiatives, and I think you guys have heard this before multiple times, but what are the key initiatives of the agency? What are officers expected to do every single day? So if I'm a supervisor and I'm a leader, is how do I inspire the people that work with me or for me to fulfill the chief's initiatives? There's 2 ways we can do this. Either I can order you to do this, right? I can say, you will do this, or I'm going to discipline you. Or I can inspire them to do this. And there is a distinction. I think we all know leaders who have inspired people to do things, regardless of any sort of, repercussion that may come. They want to fulfill the mission of the agency because either they're inspired by the agency or they're inspired by the leader. And so that's what the chief kind of talked about in his last statement, was connecting to people, right? Inspiring people to do these things. And it's to fulfill the 4 key initiatives of the agency: transportation safety, crime prevention, community engagement, employee wellness. All employees are expected to fulfill and drive towards these key initiatives within the agency every single day that they come, to include myself, because I do try to participate, like, even though in my role, in all these things. And I believe I do fill some of these roles. I do them. I don't get to do them every single day, but they are important to me. So I do engage in those things, if that makes sense. Do you have anything else with the key initiatives? Okay. So let's talk about what we talked about before, which is sort of directing, right? How are we going to direct during critical incidents? Because here's what happens. And here's the most dangerous thing you can have in police work, where you have a chaotic, incident with no leadership. Nobody knows what to do. Nobody knows where to go. Nobody knows what the next step is going to be. That is a skill that can be trained, but it has to be done effectively and within a certain level of proficiency, or people are going to get hurt. And so that's why that, to me, is so critically important, that that skill take place, and that responsibility of the supervisor is it ranks up there with the key initiatives, if that makes sense. Like, they have to be able to do that. Employee development, we already touched on this. Coaching and mentoring, that's really what we want our supervisors to do. We want them to be coaches. We want them to be mentors. We want our supervisors connecting with our employees. Again, it's to inspire and complete the vision and mission of the agency. That is a much more effective way to lead an agency, is to inspire people. Communication. All supervisors are expected to act as a liaison between the different levels of the agency, right? So if I'm a lieutenant and I know what the vision and the mission and what the directives of my commander are, I need to act as a conduit to the sergeants and the lieutenants on my squad. As a sergeant, if my watch commander, if my lieutenant is telling me these things because their captain or whatever has heard these things, I need to act as an effective conduit to push that message down. And not to say something like, oh, well, they want us to do X, Y, and Z. I don't really agree with them and what they're doing, but I guess you all should be doing this. That is not an effective way to be a liaison, okay? An effective way to be a liaison is to explain why it's being done and act as that conduit. And that works both ways, right? Like managing up to say, hey, this is what I'm hearing from the troops. Is it Lieutenant so-and-so? Can you bring this up with the captain? This is what I'm hearing. And that communication needs to flow both ways. Anything else on that one piece?
No, I think you covered it. I mean,
Okay.
a big part of this too is how do we continue to encourage and motivate officers? And that's all of us as supervisors. And I'm very clear with the people who are in supervisor role that the supervisors are one team, but the agency's one team. The whole goal is to be the best that we can be and provide the highest quality of service that we can provide. And, this is where we can all learn from each other and be better. And, part of a supervisor's job is accountability. And, our records aren't open broadly for anybody to come look at it. So when we say it's important to be accountable, that's our job, and to make sure that we do it. And every supervisor plays a role in that.
Now let's talk about, just really quick, the nuts and bolts, right? Which is like the administrative tasks, because you are expected to do that as a supervisor. And those are the things that every manager is going to have to do. Performance appraisals, right? For those of you who are, supervisors within your agency, performance appraisals, you have to approve leave, approve training requests, manage the scheduling of employees, and then this other piece, which happens, unfortunately, we crash into poles downstairs and we miss court and some other things. You're going to have to manage those investigations and determine, those recommendations for discipline, right? Those things really don't impact the COB because they're handled internally, but they're not, quote unquote, the sexy stuff, right? That's the officer that backed into a pole because, they weren't looking right. But that, again, has to be documented. So those are the sort of administrative duties that a supervisor will need to do. But again, those are very easy to teach and practice, and a lot of people get the hang of those things. That top part, and then the other things that we talked about before, those are where we really need to make an investment to make sure that our supervisors are doing a good job with connecting, learning how to be a coach, conflict resolution, all those types of things. That's where this agency is striving to make those investments, because I believe, and I think you all would agree, that those make the best leaders of organizations.
I think one of the things I would point out here too is, there's a lot of administrative duties, but the best scenario for us is the supervisors are out on the street with the officer. So you may have 20 officers working this evening, and you might have 2 or 3 supervisors working. But they still have administrative work that has to be done, if they have investigations, and things have just over the years gotten more complicated. I'm sure Parissa will agree with the body camera's great, but it adds a lot of time to reviewing. So, I don't want all the supervisors sitting at the station watching body camera for an entire shift. But, balancing the administrative and being out with the officers, that's a challenge at times, because if you get a couple of things that you have to look into that have a lot of body work camera, it just takes time. But,
We're learning.
Yeah.
I know. You're like, oh my God. I gotta watch it.
that's a fair point. I'll move on. Carry on.
There was one file I opened and it was 3 hours long, and then I realized it was 2 and it was separated by like a break. But when I first opened it up, I was like, oh God, we'll be here for a little while.
I think one more question I forgot to ask you about selection, which is a hot button topic unfortunately these days, but DEI, and like how much do you consider like having supervisors that represent the force or represent the community? Like, is that part of this, something you make?
I think it's important, I think it's important that the police department reflect the community that they serve. And I think it's important that, our diversity across our supervisory ranks is as robust as possible, because I think the different perspectives, when people come to a room to have a conversation about something, the more different perspectives are in the room, the better the outcome is going to be.
So you can consider it, or you do consider it when you make a decision?
I mean, we focus first and foremost on the work history, the skill, where they did on the test, but I can tell you that, when you look at the promotions that have been made, the promotions have been very diverse. And when we really track our last 100 hires too, to see how we're doing with hiring a diverse workforce. And we consistently are finding that we're hiring a diverse workforce in greater numbers that we already have. And our demographics pretty much match Arlington. The category that we are significantly light in is our Asian members. But other than that, we represent the demographic of our own community pretty much. But we don't ever stop that. The goal is to have a very diverse workforce. And, because I really believe that the more different perspectives in the room, the better the outcome.
And I just want to just reinforce that for me in OPR, I've said this multiple times, I cannot talk into an echo chamber. I do not want someone to agree with me all the time. And I can't have 3 individuals that all think alike with the same sort of background skills. I am intentional about the way that I select people, looking at their work history. What did you do before you came to OPR? Like, were you a detective? Do you have tactical experience? Like, were you a trainer? Those types of things. And I've been here long enough that I kind of know individuals and how they think. It's important for me to make sure that I don't have 3 of the same people sitting in there. And I don't right now actually have people that disagree with me all the time, which is a good thing, right? And disagree with each other all the time. I'm not saying it's chaos, but that's clearly not an echo chamber, because there is divergence in opinion within OPR, and that helps. That's helpful, and we'll end up in the same place usually, but the initial conversations are, not everyone agrees right out of the gate about certain things. That is important to have that. That's fair for the officers, that's fair for the agency, that's fair for the public, that's fair for everyone. So.
But we do that across the agency of making sure. I'm sorry.
Well, I just said thanks for asking that. It's a good question.
We, every work group is, how can we bring different thoughts, different opinions, diverse people into the work group? So it's part of, sort of how we structure everything.
Yeah. Good question.
How much implicit bias training do you guys do?
Implicit bias training. We haven't done implicit bias training in a little bit. So I don't know off the top of
It's like a year.
Was it a year?
We've
Okay.
had different iterations. We're coming up on where it's time to do it again. It was about a year, I think. I mean, I have to look.
I have to look.
We've done it a few times and it's,
Yeah.
it's time to do it again, because we do it across the park.
What you know what I'm probably thinking of is we did a full day of implicit bias training. And this was a little bit ago, but since then we've done small iterations, and the county has a portal, the learning portal, where they'll put out modules for those who, Mummy's a county employee, but there's the learning, and I forgot, the learning center. And they will put out, yes, they will put out, yes, okay, you guys use the Learning Center too. They will put out modules and they're with videos, with questions and things like that. It's a very effective way to push out training over a broad group of people and make sure that we're getting the training that we need, whether it just be refresher training, new training, but we're constantly hitting that. That makes sense.
We also hired, after 9/11, we created a tactical training unit because the concept of some of these complex terrorist attacks was sort of school shootings. And we focused a lot in years on the tactical response to things. So we're being very intentional now about it. That's important because the officers need to know what to do when they get there. But we also have focused on the other skills that are necessary to be effective at this. Implicit bias, communications, how do you talk your way out of something so it doesn't become something. I guess it was a couple of years ago, we hired the contractor who did trainings across the department.
yeah.
I can't remember his name, but he did a really good job.
Leroy Thompson.
That's it.
Yeah.
So when Einbinder did the whole felony stare, did you guys do like an additional training to sort of undo that training that he was giving people?
Well,
He stopped somebody because.
yeah. I don't want to get into a conversation about specific officers.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
just saying, I'm just asking, this was brought to your attention. So did you, spend time to train people that this was not the way that we.
I had conversations with multiple individuals post that incident, but I do not want to get into a
Yeah.
conversation with a specific officer being named.
No, I understand, but it's not about what you did with the specific officer. So, sort of department-wide, did you have a training or anything to sort of address the larger issue that this is how people were being trained?
So I think for tonight, let's stay with what we've prepared. And if we want to identify other things that we want to talk about in another training, we can do that.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. I think that, yeah, I think that completes the supervisory responsibility slides. So
Okay.
we'll move on to the next topic here. Yeah.
Albert, I know you and I have talked about but I just wanted to also name that some of these responsibilities are actually articulated in the ACP directive manual in the 300 section, right? So that's another way to kind of reiterate these standards that are in the manual for, purposes of transparency and accountability as well. Next slide.
Yeah. Okay, so the question was, this thing got pushed all the way to the right. It's all right. It's all right. It's all right. Oh, there you go. Perfect. Okay, so there was a question about any sort of policy changes we made as it relates to the grand jury. And there's not a lot of, I guess, literature, unless you go to the grand jury handbook, about grand juries. I know Ms. Taffy did a really good job of going over the grand jury and the rules or whatever, but we realized, and the funny thing is actually we did some research about what other agencies have within their sort of policies about grand juries. It's very thin if you look regionally about, addressing specifically with grand jury, but this is the new language, and I'll just go through it real quick. Within core procedures about grand juries, I'll start from the top. Only employees requested by the Commonwealth Attorney's Office are to appear before the grand jury. Okay, so that's, number one. If an employee is requested and cannot attend, they shall find a replacement employee to present the case in their place and shall notify the Commonwealth Attorney's Office by the Friday before the scheduled appearance. Okay, so that's sort of this sick call scenario that could potentially happen when you have a detective or an officer who, for whatever reason, can't make it into the grand jury. Here, the next section, employees will accurately discuss facts and or answer questions regarding the given case with the grand jury. And then lastly, only one employee may appear before the grand jury at a time unless otherwise explicitly requested by the Commonwealth's attorney. So those are the modifications that we made. Now you might say, well, what happens if, like, I don't know the Friday before the Monday that I'm not going to appear? That is something that can happen. And what will happen is that an officer should reach out to another officer, ask if they'll read for them, and then proffer it to the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office to determine whether or not it's okay for them to read for X, Y, and Z. So if I'm Officer Smith and I realize, hey, I'm not going to make it today and I got to go to grand jury for whatever reason, let me call Officer Jones, who's on my squad, who knows about the case, and see if they can go read in grand jury for me. Officer Jones gets the call. He says, yes, I'm a grand jury. I can read for you. Let me check with the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office if they're okay with it. And if they're okay with it, they get the folder and then they get to present before the grand jury. So that's like for the last minute thing. We've been doing that for years. So any questions on that? Yes.
I just wanted to
Well-
clarify, they're new procedures, they were not.
Right. Thank you.
Correct. New procedures, yes. Did not exist before.
Was there any sort of procedure before?
No.
Okay.
No, it was just, yeah, there wasn't.
It was a normative protocol.
If you look around, like I said, those agencies that do have grand jury policies, they're thin. So some, and I mean, I guess I could check with my counterparts to see if they even address it. There might be agencies out there that do not address grand jury testimony within their policies. So it's just not something that is widely done, but we did it. So this is the new language. Any questions on that?
This was effective starting when?
I would say that this will be effective very soon. So it will be, but this is the language. So that's a great question. It will be effective. This is the language. There's just like a couple of small, the core procedures policy is really long. There's a couple small, tiny nuanced things that don't deal with this that we got to work out with time stamping and what time you get to come in and blah, 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 that we're working out to make sure that that's all solid. And then we have a new procedure and a new mechanism to actually sign in for court and tell the clerk's office that you're unavailable for court. That's all a new thing. And we're working out the finer details in that. But this will be live here very shortly.
Great, thank you.
Have you considered having the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office do a roll call or sort of warming things up between the officers and the Commonwealth's Attorney to the extent,
We do that.
Yeah.
We do that
Oh,
regularly.
Oh, okay.
Actually, that made me think about a question. I'm not sure if I heard you cover it, Chris, in your presentation, but just in terms of what the structure is of how your paralegal manages witnesses who are subpoenaed to go before the grand jury.
Right, so
Would you like-
she has people slotted in for a time period. And so it's
There's a
usually
schedule.
about 15 minutes per case. Some go faster, some go slower, but it's usually about 15 minutes per case. And so starting at 9:15, it's 9:15, 9:30, 9:45, 10 o'clock. And she has it listed by the officer that she's expecting. I'm saying she because the person that does grand jury, both of them were she's. It might be a he one day. But they sit, depending on whether the grand, so we get an entire courtroom and the jury room. Sometimes they want to sit at the conference table in the jury room and have somebody come in and testify. We have a lot of officers. We'll ask them to do that so that the officers can, wait in the courtroom, in the gallery where the benches are, because otherwise they're just hanging out in the halls and there's no chairs and it's not comfortable. So ideally, she's sitting in the courtroom. The grand jurors are in the back room where the grand jury normally deliberates, and officers are coming in, checking in. She makes sure that they're sworn, and then they sit down and wait for their turn. If somebody comes in early, or one officer brought their kid, it was kid was really cute. But like we brought them in out of turn. So we'll change up the order of things sometimes to accommodate people. But otherwise, you check in with her and then she lets you in.
What's the process of the witnesses getting sworn look like?
So normally they get sworn, if there's an officer that happens to be in the room when the judge is on the bench and charges the grand jurors, they'll swear the officer in at the same time that they swear me in, the judge will. Otherwise, they normally go down to the clerk's office on the 6th floor and get sworn in by the clerk of court and then come upstairs. And I say upstairs because normally this happens on the 10th or 11th floor.
Thank you.
That's all I have with this. Let's go to the last section. Okay.
Real
Some of
quick before we
Oh, yeah,
before we
sorry.
move on, Parissa, is there
Yeah.
similarly a best practices or rules of procedure, I guess, for what the clerk does vis-a-vis the grand jury? Is like some sort of kind of written, process out there? Similarly, is there some sort of best practices training for how attorneys work with their officers? And if you could kind of just quickly talk about that. I know this is not your part of the presentation, but it'd just be interesting to know.
Yeah, so we didn't have any particular process with the clerks because normally the only people who go to get sworn in are people who were asked to be in the grand jury. Now we give the clerk a list. And so the clerk is making sure that only the people that are on that list are getting sworn in.
And then with attorneys, as far as, how they work with potential witnesses and all that, is there some sort of, could you describe the best practices training and review for that just really quickly?
So in general, our policy is that you should be reaching out to your witnesses early. You should be, preparing them for their testimony. We have to be careful. We know what preparing is so that it doesn't look too much like coaching. So we normally say, these are the questions that we'll ask. Please read your report in advance. But when it's grand jury, they've already gone through that in preparation for the preliminary hearing, even if the preliminary hearing, even if the hearing was waived. So, we don't typically rehash all of that. So, we sort of rely on the officers to know what happened and read their reports and come in. Particularly because we're not asking them questions because we're not there. So, they're just giving a narrative and answering whatever grand jury questions might come up.
Thank you.
For time,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask if we can kind of focus on the second half of corrective action. I think we've covered maybe a couple of times, and I'll see if you have questions, but 1 through 3, I think we've talked a little bit about this process in detail before.
That's fine.
Sure.
I'll move on, but I do want to hit, because some of this is new.
Sure.
And I don't know if it was covered, but I will go very quickly. I promise you. Okay, so I'm going to go through steps 1 and 2 very quickly. Step 1, investigating allegation. That's clearly what we do. What you may not know, or maybe you realize, is that we as an employer need to ensure due process. There are due process guarantees at the federal, state, and county level. And I'm going to go through all, and you're going to see these things appear throughout this little quick presentation that I'm going to give. When we collect evidence, you might be listening to this when you're listening to an officer interview. The officer has what's called the Law Enforcement Officer's Procedural Guarantee, and that's a Virginia code that requires us to provide the officer under administrative investigation certain documents, and they are availed certain rights as a law enforcement officer. So that is one protection that they have that we must give them by code. Of course, once the investigation is done, we determine the finding, and this only relates to sustained findings. How does that process work? Okay, When you have a sustained finding, there's corrective action, which is shift level counseling or a letter of corrective action. And there's discipline, which is a letter of disciplinary action, demotion, or termination. Those are the 3 levels of discipline you can get. How does someone come up with a recommendation for corrective action? Well, they're going to look at the progressive corrective action guideline, which is a 2-part matrix. Part A is a mitigating and aggravating circumstance, potentially. Part B is the actual matrix, where you'll see for certain types of offenses, it's arranged in X, Y, and Z. You will then consult with OPR to get the discipline history and similar offenses by others. Why do they do that? The discipline history is to understand, because that's in the matrix about second offense, third offense, but similar offenses by others to ensure consistency across the agency. That is, again, a due process guarantee that we have to ensure. We cannot, egregiously discipline someone that's completely outside the bounds. So we need to ensure that. All right. How does this recommendation process work? A section commander will meet with the employee. Well, why does the section commander meet with the employee if they're making that recommendation? It is to ensure the employee's Loudermill rights. And that's the federal guarantee that an employee has to due process as a civil servant, right? So there's constitutional guarantees that we have as an employer and they as civil servants that we need to ensure that we provide them. They need to be able to proffer a plausible argument as to why perhaps they don't deserve to get this. And the decider, the person making that recommendation, is at the section commander level. And so they need to be able to proffer that evidence. It's to ensure that due process guarantee. The section commander will then forward that recommendation to the deputy chief. And then that deputy, that once it's approved by the deputy chief, it goes to the chief for final approval. And then the section commander will then meet once again with the employee and then discipline the employee. So I did that very quickly because I just wanted to make sure that I did that for time. All right, next, let's go. Okay, let's talk about something that perhaps you are not familiar with, okay? Let's talk about discipline. There's 3 things that can happen with discipline. I said discipline equals a letter of disciplinary action, demotion, or termination. Let's say an employee gets one of these things. Well, then what happens? This is the county's due process guarantee for an employee, and it impacts every single county employee. Constitutional officers are not included in this. They're expressly excluded from this. But if you are a civil servant within the county and you want to grieve your discipline, you go to AR 2.7, Chapter 18, and it spells out and enumerates how this process is going to work. And I'll go through this very quickly. Step 1 is you're going to have a discussion with your immediate supervisor, which means that you're going to go down and you're going to tell your immediate supervisor, hey, I'm not okay with this discipline. I want to grieve this, okay? You have 20 days to do that from the time that you get that disciplinary letter, right? So the date is whatever, March 1st. You have until March 20th or 21st in order to have that conversation with your immediate supervisor. Your immediate supervisor is required, again, by this policy to provide you a written or verbal response within 7 days. It doesn't enumerate what that verbal response is, but they're required to provide that to you. Supervisors are generally told, got it, I will make sure that your grievance gets forwarded up through the chain of command. That is a verbal response, okay?
Does the union provide someone to help you with this, or is that under?
Great question. Arlington County Chapter 6-30 is the collective bargaining ordinance. So the county voted in the collective bargaining ordinance, I believe 2 years ago, they voted to allow collective bargaining. Within that ordinance, you will see that disciplinary grievances are expressly excluded from collective bargaining. You will see that in 6-30. So this grievance process within the county as a county employee is outside of Arlington County Code 6-30. You can read it for yourself. It talks about collective bargaining, and you will see the language in there that expressly excludes this grievance process. Great question.
But I think you're asking about representation. So when somebody gets into the actual grievance process, like when they meet with me, step 2, they can talk to the police union who does I don't know, often, sometimes provide counsel to come to from the step from me forward.
Yes. And we'll talk about that here with step 2. So you get that verbal response from your immediate supervisor. Immediate supervisor says, hey, like I will, let them know. They've been instructed. Let me know immediately when someone wants to grieve something and tell me what you told them. Okay. I will then take it from there and say, here is the grievance appeal form. It's in AC Commons, which is an internal website. Please complete this out. This is the newest version. It's the 2021 version. Complete this out and fill this out and return it to me. I will then have communications with them to set up this meeting with the department director, the chief, within 7 days of getting this grievance form. These timelines can be extended upon mutual agreement between both parties. So this, it says 27, whatever. If both parties agree to mutually extend the timeline, then they can be extended. So I'll look at his calendar. I'll see what time works for him. Oftentimes it's not going to be within 7 days because he's an incredibly busy man. So we will schedule that conducive with the officer schedule and then his schedule. And what the chief was alluding to is a lot of times the employee will want a shop steward or someone from the union present with them. Just, because it does feel weird walking into a meeting with the chief of police, right? If you're a lone officer with 2 years and you walk into a meeting with the chief of police, it's probably a little bit, I guess, intimidating. So a shop steward can be present. A lot of people have chosen to do that, and they're there to just sort of, sit next to them or whatever and provide that support. This is where they get to proffer to the chief and sort of plead their case. Here are the reasons why I think the discipline should be reduced because of these factors. You may not be aware of this, but X, Y, and Z, et cetera, and they'll sort of plead their case out to the chief. And then the chief will, make a decision about what that's going to be. He will either decide that, yes, I agree with you, I'm going to reduce this discipline, or no, I disagree with you. I'm not going to reduce this discipline, but that will come out in the form of a written response. So this is where a written response now is required in step 2 to be provided to the employee, basically outlining all the reasons as to why he is not going to either reduce the discipline or he is going to reduce the discipline. From there, after that written response is delivered, if the employee is unhappy, right? So let's say the chief decides, hey, I'm not going to reduce the discipline. They can go to step 3. Step 3 is a meeting with the county manager, right? So the county manager, they meet, so sort of the same format, meets with the county manager, forwards their case, says, hey, these are the reasons why you should, reduce the discipline, et cetera. And then within 7 days of that meeting occurring, the county manager in step 3 is required again to produce to the employee a written response as to, yes, it will be reduced, no, it won't be reduced, et cetera. If the employee is still unhappy, right, not satisfied with that, then it moves to step 4, okay? And step 4 has within it these timelines, but step 4, if you can imagine, is a group of attorneys who have volunteered to do this, who have very busy lives and very busy schedules. And they have the civil service hearings for all employees throughout the county that want to move to step 4. Okay, so they got to schedule that in. Step 4, to go from 3 to 4, in reality sakes, is it takes a long time. The move from 3 to 4 is an extended period of time because you're working with multiple different schedules for people that are volunteering to do this on a part-time basis, kind of like you all are. And they have to hear all the step 4 cases that come in through the county. So that is, if you imagine a long, lengthy traffic docket with only one judge presiding or a group of judges, you can imagine how long that could potentially take. Once the Civil Service Commission rules, that ends the process. And what we didn't talk about is police trial board, but I don't think anyone has really done that. We probably have to gather some people and figure that out. But most people go through the Civil Service Commission. Public safety is allowed to go to this police trial board concept, but been so long.
So
don't
to
think-
clarify for steps,
Yeah.
to clarify for steps 2 and 3, in
Yes,
those meetings, it is just the employee and an optional support person. There's no, is there any other person there either with response from the department, or is there the ability to call any witnesses or anything like that?
on behalf of the employee.
Correct. For
On
steps 2 and 3.
Step 2, it doesn't enumerate that, but it says meeting with the department director. And I would say,
So there's no, I mean, if the employee wants to bring somebody with them, like a shop steward, we've certainly allowed that. Who's in
Right.
the room from the agency is me, Albert, and then the deputy chief of whatever division the person works in.
And they'll present a response to.
No, I'm the only one that responds because I'm the only one
Okay.
that can change the discipline.
Okay. But they won't be there if they had to call witnesses or anything like that. They can't do that.
No.
Okay, and
Keep in
that's the same, and it's,
Yeah,
and
it's
that's
not
the
an,
same.
I'm sorry.
No, go on.
It's really it's the step 2 is me. It's really the opportunity for the employee to share anything they want with me about why they think it's wrong. So it's really the employee's opportunity to put anything else out there they want me to consider. So it's not a lot of questions. It's really the employee's opportunity to share whatever they want to share, and then we just talk about it from there.
Got you. And then step 3 is basically the same experience, but it would be replacing you with the county manager.
Correct.
yes.
Okay, and someone there from the police from ACPD is there, but they don't speak either, because just like in your meeting.
Nobody from the
Okay.
police department, the employee. And if they
Okay.
bring like an attorney or a shop steward with them, that would, and then it's that person, the manager.
And step 4 is only a written record. There is no actual appearance.
No, I'm sorry, the written appeal, a hearing conducted. So you can see a hearing is conducted on
Okay,
that. You see step 4, there is an actual hearing. Yes, you have a
Okay.
hearing in front of the Civil Service Commission. And that
Okay.
you're doing basically the same thing that you were doing in 2 and 3, which is like to provide evidence and, you can, a lot of times people will bring an attorney with them. So depending on how far they want to go with it. So,
But
Right.
step 4 does have witnesses and
yeah, so it's like
Okay.
a hearing.
it
Yeah,
is like that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
And the
And
police
then-
department actually does present there then too.
Mhm. We're going to be
Okay.
called as witnesses in step 4.
Perfect.
And just so you know, like once an employee leaves step 2, I mean, we lose control of how long things take, right? So if you can imagine, it's in the county manager's office, it's with the Civil Service Commission. We're beholden to whatever timelines and, scheduling that they want to produce. So out of step 2, it's like, we have no idea how long that's going to take.
Thanks, Charles.
And I think that wraps up,
Mhm.
yeah.
I have
uh,
2 follow-up questions for the progressive corrective action guideline, that matrix.
mhm.
I don't think we've seen that.
I think I shared it a while, yeah, it was,
Okay.
I shared it a while ago on a separate event, but what I can do is, it's included in the case number that has the IIRs and UOF reviews in it. I always attach it in there, but I'll make sure that I put one in for 2025, so it's in there.
And I thought about that when you were speaking, but I didn't want to put it up on the screen because I didn't necessarily think, I don't know if that was a public document or not, but what I thought we maybe could speak to, just generally speaking, is like, what kind of factors do you take into account when you're determining, for example, for some of the allegations that may have like a range of discipline, things like their previous history, supervisory roles, things like that. Like maybe we could speak to
Yeah.
generally what kind of things you take.
Yeah,
into
so
consideration.
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, which is, there are aggravating and mitigating circumstances in Part A of that Progressive Corrective Action Guideline. An aggravating circumstance would be something like, there's multiple offenses, or the offense was so egregious that, it shakes public trust or something like that. Or, a good example would be like, You know, you could have a police vehicle violations that, again, I like to use this pole strike, you know, backing into a pole down on P2 where you've done some pay transfer on a pole, or you can have police vehicles allegation or a sustained finding for something where you totaled a cruiser, right? Like the cruiser is just, you just like destroyed a $50,000 police vehicle. And maybe it's your first police vehicles violation. Do we as an agency think that the person that backed into the pole should get the same thing as the officer that literally just totaled a brand new cruiser? The answer is of course not, right? That is an aggravating circumstance to what occurred, right? So those are the types of things that come into play.
What about supervisory responsibilities?
Yes, so this is a long discussion, and this is not just supervisors. So let me talk broadly about this. What a 2-year officer does right outside of field training, who may not have the knowledge, skills, and abilities or comprehension to handle a call effectively the way that they should, is completely different than a 15 to 20-year veteran, right? Who has had that experience, who knows what they should be doing. So now let's apply this to the supervisory, non-supervisory, aspect, which is if you are a supervisor who is passed this assessment center, done all these things to prove that you are, you can effectively do these things, yes, you are going to be held to a higher standard because you know better, right? You're a supervisor, you know better. Some of that is because of just simply your experience, right? Supervisors are generally not people that have 2 or 3 years on the road. So you've been here for 10 or 15 years. Like you know what you should be doing. Unless it's a supervisory related skill. So the one caveat to that is, let's say there's a supervisor responsibility to do X, Y, Z during a use of force. But you're a brand new supervisor, right? It's kind of the same thing that takes place, which is this is new to you. There has to be some grace. It doesn't mean that we're not going to hold you accountable for what you did, but you're a brand new supervisor. There has to be a certain degree of latitude with that.
The only other thing that wasn't talked about is consistency across the agency. So we look for any other things that are, the same, similar, in the same ballpark, because to make sure that we're being fair with discipline for across the department. That's why, a recommendation starts at the command level, wherever the person's assigned, but it's ultimately checked by Albert and his staff because they're the ones that have the access to everything to make sure that, employee A doesn't get, 40-hour suspension for something employee B got 2 hours.
Right. So we've talked about before that, violating the bias-free policing policy would be grounds for termination because it's incompatible with ACPD culture and values. And we've talked a little bit about the distinction between, general personal contacts and conduct unbecoming, where we've talked a little bit in some of the cases where we reviewed personal contacts violations about, the degrees of severity. What are the kinds of things that would affect someone's continued ability to remain a supervisor?
It depends on the incident. It depends on the behavior, what was done. I think there's a lot of focus on the specific policy section, but it really comes down to what happened. Whatever policy sections get listed, that's important because we have policy, but the final determiner is what exactly did the person do? What are the exact circumstances of the entirety of this incident?
Have there been examples? Have there been incidents where supervisors needed to be demoted because of disciplinary action?
Yeah.
Maybe not actually without getting into specifics, but just are there some guidelines generally that kind of shape some, framework for what rises to the level of perhaps warranting a demotion? And then I think also might be helpful, because we just talked about the grievance process, and I know from an employer perspective, you also have to think about the other side of the coin, which is what happens if you consider demoting someone. It also has to go through a similar type of grievance process and that sort of thing. So maybe speak to that.
It's not even a grievance process. If I'm going to move for discipline outside of my authority, which is think it's 120 hours or
It's,
something.
it's
like
a,
that.
yeah, I think it's actually 200 now, but yes,
But
but
if-
that's the county manager.
The county manager has to do it.
You said it's 200 hours?
I gotta look, they upped it, but I gotta look.
You're saying to demote someone.
A suspension above a certain number of hours,
Okay.
demotion and termination are by the county manager. So if I'm moving, in that scenario, if I'm recommending that, I do a recommendation and then there's a hearing called a fact finding hearing, which is, it's an opportunity that we sit, we talk, the person says whatever they want me to consider before I make a recommendation to the county manager. And it goes to the county manager who makes a decision, and then the grievance process can come in behind that. But there's a whole other step if it's discipline outside of what I can do.
So it's a fact-finding hearing?
Mhm.
And the results of that go in a written statement from you to the county manager
And the employee,
and the employee.
I have to respond to the employee and I have to send a recommendation to the county manager.
So that's a process that would be initiated by you as the chief, not perhaps someone that supervisor directly reports to?
I didn't get it, sorry.
So would you be the one that would have to initiate that process, or is there?
No, it's
no?
me.
Okay, so,
Because it's discipline. My position is the only position in the agency that can do formal discipline, which is suspension. So if it's discipline that's outside of my authority, then I make the recommendation to the county manager.
but I'm asking to distinguish because like when you have regular discipline, typically it goes down to that person's direct supervisor and then comes kind of funnels back up to you.
That still happens.
Right, so that still happens with. a
I'm just an
recommendation
added
for
step.
that. Gotcha.
Like if it's discipline that I can do, the deputy chief makes a recommendation to me, I decide to do it. If it's discipline above what I can do, I make a recommendation to the county manager. He makes a decision and does it. or
But
whatever.
my direct question is like, is it possible, is there a scenario in which the deputy chief that person reports to, or even if there's a captain in between or something like that, or a lieutenant in between that person's position and the deputy chief, could they potentially make a recommendation to say like, I think that the discipline should be X and possibly a demotion, like essentially like,
So you're
outside the
asking,
guidance.
could a captain recommend demotion?
right, I mean,
Yes.
obviously you'd have to
Yeah.
sign off on it, but
Yeah,
just
it just
like.
goes through the chain of command, the same way.
Gotcha.
So yeah, absolutely.
In layman's terms, I'm just asking, like, the person who has like the most direct purview of that officer can say, hey, I don't know if this person is ready or
Yes.
can
Weigh
wait
in.
to save,
Correct.
to serve in this.
And that's
I'm
why,
just an added step in the.
I got you. Okay. I just wanted to make that clear and that like you
Yes.
still have the ability. to
Yes.
get that.
and that's why it's important that the section commander, kind of what the chief talked about earlier, the section commander makes the recommendation actually, because they are the closest contact
Correct.
with that employee, right?
To see,
Then-
is this part of like
Yes.
behavior that's going
Yes.
on?
Mhm.
Yes.
Are there
So
mitigating?
one-off, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And so I found it's 20 calendar days. He can do up to 20 calendar days. And then he has to go to the county manager.
And
So,
it's like,
yeah, yeah, 20 calendar days, which if you work a 10-hour day is 200 hours. Well, but if you work, I guess if you work an 8-hour day. So,
I went into a whole bunch of
No.
jargon to get to what I was just basically trying to ask. which is
Sorry,
right.
I wouldn't catch it.
Okay, so this was really helpful. I think the supervisory overview and everything, I may run some of those things back to you just for like when we do want to talk about case specifics.
sure.
But I think that gives us context. I know some of you have started previewing materials for the case that we're going to discuss in March. If you have interim questions about like anything that Marissa or Albert presented, let me know.
Albert, there's one last thing it was from the beginning of your presentation and
Yeah.
it was just moving, so I didn't want to go back to it.
Yeah, no
It was
problem.
just a clarification. So they take the assessment, you can promote within those 3 categories, you can look at the top 5 or 20%, whichever is the greater. But how many of that 5 to 20% must you then offer a position? Like, how do you determine that number? And is that
Great
number
question.
sometimes-
It really depends on, it only depends on how many positions we have available. I mean, there's no requirement. You know, like right now, because of our staffing crisis, we have a lot of positions that we have not filled because we're short. So, you know, but if in normal times, if we're fully staffed, if one lieutenant retires, absent us making some decision to make a change, we promote one lieutenant, one sergeant.
Okay. And then does it only happen in that 2-year window, by which I mean every 2 years you do this for all positions, whether there's something available or not? And if it's not
Yes.
available okay. And if
Yes.
it's not available and you passed, you're just banked as someone who is eligible.
So I just want to make sure it's clear that we do the test every 2 years, but we'll promote several times during those 2 years. Does that make sense? It's not we do the test, we promote once. So we may promote in March and then again in July. So
Gotcha.
it just depends on when vacancies occur.
Gotcha.
But once that 2-year list is over, you start from ground zero again. You got to take the
Gotcha.
test. Yeah,
Gotcha.
it's like it didn't exist before, and welcome to taking the assessment center a second time or a third time. It's terrible. So,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent. We'll just do my report out and Mummy's report out, and then we don't have any requests for public comment, so we're going to skip that, and probably a couple of small updates from you guys on community engagement. We extended a invitation to another member to join the COB, but they declined. I think maybe circumstances changed between when they applied and now. So we have 2 more applications and we're interviewing them this week, but we would really like, the county board has been working closely with us to see if we can't get that vacancy filled in March. Obviously, they'll have to go through the training period and it may take a little bit of time. But we also have 1 report ready to go up on Friday on the website and 2 more ready to go to ACPD for review. So the next batch of investigation lead report reviews will come to you guys, and we'll just kind of keep funneling those through the process. Again, like when you want, if going through it, you want to set up a meeting, which we need to like walk through the report and refresh or whatever. I've tried to send all the information in one email, but that's what Dave and Jim's are next. I think you guys are the next 2 to review completed reports. So, Mummy, do you want to give your report out and updates?
I'll keep mine brief. I just wanted to mention that we have pushed back the CERT review that I discussed at our last meeting, since we're going to do this investigation. We thought it was helpful, and I'd love to get y'all's feedback about whether, you know, this additional context is helpful. I think just kind of knowing a little bit about the context going into an investigation, and particularly in a subject area where people like may not have like professional or personal experience, is really key to just kind of understanding the dynamics. So I'd love to get y'all's feedback. Doesn't have to necessarily mean now, it can be verbally or by email, as to like if this format works and if it makes sense. And the reason why I'm saying that is because after we do the next investigation, we'll have our first CERT review. And I was thinking similarly to this one, it may not have to be a whole separate meeting, but maybe at the beginning of that meeting, because that one is not going to be, it's going to be our first time doing an actual review versus an investigation. So we may not necessarily, it would be structured a little bit differently in that, like and even my report will probably be structured a little bit differently. Essentially, we'll be reviewing the underlying CERT investigation, but that particular CERT investigation didn't then result in a separate administrative investigation in the way that you guys have traditionally done them, right? With allegations and that sort of thing. So maybe not a vote and that sort of thing. So my point is, I think it would be helpful to also similarly have some sort of training or some sort of, you know, presentation at the beginning of it, just to give an overview of like how the CERT process works, to make sure we all kind of understand. So some feedback about this structure would be helpful, just in understanding like what information is valuable to you all, what resonates, what doesn't, so we can set up that similar presentation or the next presentation, make any adjustments that are needed. So I predict that we'll be doing that one in April. I didn't want to confuse the bunch with the upcoming investigation that we're going to do in March. But because we're doing that one at the end of March, I also wanted to just gauge whether you think it would be okay to go ahead and start sending the materials out for the April cert review, or if that would get like a little bit confusing with like too much evidence going on. So maybe you guys can think over that and just let me know. And I'll coordinate with Julie and Dave to see when it would be good to start sending that stuff out as well. But that will be a little bit of a different process. So I'll probably send out some maybe kind of guidelines to help shape that discussion, and in coordination with Albert, we'll just kind of figure out what we think might make the best sense in terms of how we approach that discussion. Otherwise, we're nearing the end, hopefully, towards our senior management analyst hiring process. So hopefully I'll have a final update for you guys on that at our next meeting. I think that's it for me in terms of administrative updates.
It would be inappropriate to call that person New Ian.
Probably. Great to learn a new name.
That's good. Okay, open discussion. We've got a date scheduled for our community engagement.
We do. So we have a room scheduled at Arlington Mill. It's going to be 7 o'clock on the 17th of March.
19.
No, I think it's the 17th. It's Monday.
Monday.
Okay.
And so the idea there is to have a relatively brief, hour and a half, maybe 2 at the most, meeting for the public to identify the COB and the IPA, and to introduce ourselves again to whoever, would like to be there. And of course, ACPD is welcome, and everybody's welcome. So.
Yeah. We'll circulate a formal kind of notice of that opportunity probably in the next week, both to our normal stakeholders and the public. But thank you guys both for putting that together. I know it was a lot of logistics and coordination. Anything else?
We'll also circulate like the agenda for the meeting and a flyer that you can distribute.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
Anything else?
It's gonna be a very fancy flyer, I'm sure.
Basic will be good.
Excellent. Well, since we don't have a quorum, we will not vote on last week's meeting minutes until our next meeting, but otherwise I declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you. Thank you for folks participating virtually and online. We appreciate you joining us this evening, and we'll see you next time. Those of you in the room, you can stay for 2 minutes. It's unrelated. Getting adjourned.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.